Prince Harry has opened himself up to a potential world of trouble with his openness about the use of drugs in his memoirs and in the latest online therapy session. This and more discussed in this video. Stay tuned. So when Prince Harry decided to cash in on his memoirs in his book Spare, sharing intimate and private details with the rest of the world for a price, I doubt that he realised that some of those revelations would potentially land him in trouble with the authorities. Now, as has been highlighted by several newspaper articles, now it is unclear whether or not Harry declared his use of drugs in his visa application when he first entered the United States. And as Piers Morgan has quite rightly said, the US takes a very dim view of drug use by non-US citizens, and a dim view in general, but particularly so with non-US citizens, because of course you need to apply to a visa to enter the country in the first place. On said application for visa, you need to tell the authorities of the United States whether you've ever been arrested, whether you've ever been charged, whether you've ever been convicted, and whether you've ever been involved in any kind of illicit drug use. That obviously means you are required to admit any prior use of illicit substances, whether or not so charged for any relative offences. So the application process requires you to provide information in an open and frank manner. And the questions in the security and background section go as follows. Have you ever been arrested or convicted for any offence or crime, even though subject of a pardon, amnesty or similar action? Have you ever violated or engaged in a conspiracy to violate any law relating to controlled substances? Now, just pausing for thought on that question. It doesn't ask, have you ever been convicted in relation to any law relating to controlled substances? The question is very specific. Have you ever violated or engaged in a conspiracy to violate any law relating to controlled substances? And then it goes on asking about money laundering and various other questions. But the key question here is, what did Harry say in his application in response to this question? Because as you know by watching my channel by now, the law is always about consistency, and lying to an authority is a very serious offence. So if he has filled this application in and said no, he's never violated or conspired to violate any law relating to controlled substances, and on that basis his application for visa was granted, and now in his book Spare and in the online therapy session, which I'll come back to in a moment, he's admitted the use of drugs. Now, you don't need to be an immigration expert lawyer, and I'm certainly not an expert immigration lawyer, but I read that immigration experts have warned that if he has indeed lied in the past, then his current visa may well be revoked, in which case two things might happen. He may be asked to leave the United States, although I think in reality that seems a little bit of a stretch, but not impossible. But on the other hand, if he does voluntarily leave the United States, for example, to attend the King's coronation, then he may not be allowed back into the United States, meaning he will be stuck in the United Kingdom. And looking at this from a wider fairness perspective, perhaps, most people that apply for a visa to the United States that have a history of drug use would probably be denied an American visa, although immigration decisions are, I'm assured, made on a case-by-case basis, meaning that they will review your application, and if you do answer yes to one of those questions, have you ever violated or engaged in a conspiracy to violate any law relating to controlled substances, your case will be looked at more closely. Doubtless there would be some kind of interview, and at the very least you'd be required to provide a full and detailed explanation as to what that history is, how long ago, what it was for, and why you were doing it. Although broadly speaking, the US immigration rules state that an individual's current or past actions which involve drug or criminal activities may make the applicant ineligible for a visa. Now, of course, it's impossible for me or for most people to say what type of visa Harry is in the United States on, but analysts I read have speculated that he either holds a spousal visa, obviously because he's married to Meghan Markle, or another type of visa which is usually given to people with extraordinary abilities. Obviously, these are normally issued to celebrities and athletes, and it would have to be renewed every 3 years. Furthermore, anyone who is seeking residency in the United States, whether temporary or permanent, must also answer a series of questions about their criminal background and drug history when applying for said residence. Experts again write in the papers that he should have been denied residency in the US if he's failed to disclose any drug use during the application process, and that he would have been asked about such use, and if he was truthful in the answers, then he should have been denied. This is from Professor Alberto Benitez, director of George Washington University Immigration Clinic, speaking to The Telegraph. The professor goes on to argue that if Harry did not detail his drug use, he would have been perjuring himself on an official US government document. He claims that honesty would have been in his best interests, and noted that he may have received discretion from immigration officials because of his royal status. The professor says if he wasn't Prince Harry and instead he was Fred Jones, and he had this kind of background, he'd have a lot more scrutiny and could certainly see the green card being denied. Reportedly, the US State Department officials have declined to answer newspapers' questions about whether or not his admission of drug use would cause difficulties with his immigration status. They said visa records are confidential under US law, therefore we cannot discuss the details of individual cases. We cannot speculate on whether someone may or may not be eligible to a visa, and whenever an individual applies for a US visa, a consular officer reviews the facts of the case and determines whether the applicant is eligible for that visa based on US law. But of course, now with all of this really being wide out in the open and broadly and brazenly talking about drug use in some sort of positive light, it does spark up quite a deal of criticism, including that from myself as a practicing barrister. Whilst the bulk of my law is not in criminal work, of course, I do support the law and all of the criminal laws involved. So with the comparison of Prince Harry and, as the professor put it, Fred Jones, you'd be forgiven for thinking that this is wildly unfair if Prince Harry has been admitted into the United States, if indeed he has admitted to prior drug use, or if he's allowed to remain there. Now, if he hadn't previously admitted it, which would mean that that's perjury because now he has admitted it publicly and openly, and so if he didn't declare that on his original application, then clearly he's lied in an official US government document. And as the saying goes, no one is and no one should be above the law. So everybody should be beholden to the same laws, the same rules, the same immigration, and so on. And he didn't just stop by referencing them in his book of memoirs, Spare. He also went on to do an online therapy session, which ordinarily should be entirely confidential and private. Now, one argument might be that this is allowing other people a window in and sharing difficulties, and therefore encouraging other people to talk about any kind of trauma. However, it's quite obvious from the online therapy session what it was really advertising. But coming full circle, as I said at the outset, this could genuinely raise serious problems for Harry, both living and remaining in the United States and potentially returning to the United States if he visits the UK for the King's coronation. And many of you would be forgiven for thinking that it's entirely unfair if he's had special treatment just because he's part of the royal family. And on the other hand, some of you might think that's entirely fair. Whichever side of that fence you fall on, please leave your thoughts and comments in the box below. What do you think should be happening? What do you think should happen now? And please remember to like this video and subscribe. And as always, thank you for watching.